You know that feeling when you look at a cloud and you swear you see a dog? Or you walk past a car and it looks like it's smiling at you? Well, you are definitely not alone. Today, we are going to dive into the absolutely fascinating science of why our brains are hardwired to see faces everywhere.
I mean, it starts with the simple stuff, right? You've probably seen a power outlet that looks exactly like a little face. And this one here in Denmark, it's just a perfect, cheerful little example.
But oh, it gets so much bigger. If you look at this church in Florida from just the right angle, the windows and the roof tiles, they seem to make the face of a surprised chicken. You see it now, don't you?
And sometimes it's just, well, it's hilariously up to date. The headlights and the grille on this car come together so perfectly it looks just like the nerd emoji. Seriously, it is uncanny.
So all of this begs the big question. Why? What is the deal? Why do our brains insist on finding a face in a building or an expression on a piece of plastic? What is actually going on inside our heads?
Well, this whole phenomenon has a name. It's called pareidolia. It's a mouthful, I know. It comes from the Greek words for beside and image, and it's basically our brain's tendency to see a meaningful image, usually a face, in a totally random pattern.
And listen, this isn't just some quirky glitch in our programming. As the great Carl Sagan pointed out, this is a fundamental part of who we are. From the moment we can see, we are built to find and recognize faces. It's a skill that is literally hardwired into our brains.
Okay, so let's pop the hood on our brain's built-in face supercomputer. We're going to explore how this system works and, maybe more importantly, why it evolved to be so incredibly powerful in the first place.
And the answer really comes down to survival. Think about it. For our ancient ancestors, being able to quickly spot another person and instantly judge if they were a friend or a foe was a life or death skill. Our brains got hypersensitive to facial patterns because it was a huge evolutionary advantage. It's much better to see a face in the clouds by mistake than to miss a tiger hiding in the bushes.
So here's how it works in a nutshell. It's a lightning-fast three-step process. First, your visual cortex picks up on basic shapes, lines, curves. That info then zips over to a special part of your temporal lobe that's all about faces. And finally, your prefrontal cortex puts it all together for the big, aha, that's a face moment. The whole thing is like a super efficient assembly line.
But what happens when this powerful automatic system gets tricked? This is where it gets really interesting. Because the mistakes our brain makes actually reveal just how committed it is to finding faces, even when they aren't really there.
Okay, take the hollow mask illusion. Even when you're literally looking at the inside of a mask, that concave shape, your brain flips it and makes it look like a normal face sticking out. Why? Because your brain's experience, its deep-seated knowledge that faces are convex, is so strong it just overrides what your eyes are telling it. That's a perfect example of what's called top-down processing.
All right, get ready for another one that's going to mess with your head. This is the Thatcher effect. Now, I want you to look at these two upside-down images. At a quick glance, they look pretty normal, right? Maybe a little off, but nothing too wild.
Okay, now let's flip them right side up. Whoa, see? The image on the right is suddenly completely grotesque. This is such a brilliant illustration of the point. Your brain is so highly specialized for recognizing upright faces that when they're upside down, that system basically just switches off. You can't even process how distorted the features are until they're oriented the right way again.
So this isn't just some neurological quirk we see in a lab. This deeply ingrained human tendency has had a massive impact on our culture, from the highest forms of art all the way down to how we text each other every single day.
Of course, artists have been hacking our perception for centuries. Back in 1533, Hans Holbein hid this crazy, distorted skull in his painting, The Ambassadors, that you can only see from a weird angle. A few decades later, you had Arcimboldo literally creating portraits out of fruit and books. And then, of course, Salvador Dali became the master of making landscapes and random objects just melt into these haunting faces.
And we see this everywhere today. I mean, think about the simple smiley face emoji, made of punctuation. That's where it all started. Or the Among Us meme, where people were seeing those little crewmates in absolutely everything. It's the reason people see religious figures on a piece of toast, or famously on a Cheeto. And it's why that one rock formation on Mars captured the entire world's imagination.
So, okay, beyond the funny memes and mind-bending illusions, what does all of this really tell us about ourselves? Well, it turns out that our tendency for pareidolia can reveal some pretty interesting things about our own psychology and our beliefs.
So what's really interesting is that studies show some of us are way more prone to this.
On average, women tend to report it more than men, which might be linked to a higher attunement to social and emotional cues. People with higher neuroticism or those with strong religious beliefs, they also score higher. And so do highly creative people, which makes sense, right? They're naturally good at finding patterns in chaos.
And this actually leads to a pretty profound point. When you really stop and think about it, what is a painted portrait? It's just streaks of color on a canvas. Our brain is doing all the heavy lifting, turning those abstract blobs and lines into a person. So in a way, you could say all art is a form of controlled pareidolia. The pattern is put there on purpose, but our brain's response is exactly the same.
And that leaves us with this final, really cool idea. Our brains are pattern-seeking machines, through and through. Most of the time, the patterns we recognize out in the world are real and meaningful. But pareidolia, that's what happens when our internal pattern detector gets a hit, but there's no actual pattern out there to match it. It's pattern recognition just without the harmony. So the next time you see a face staring back at you from the clouds, just smile. That's your ancient, powerful brain just trying to make sense of it all. What will you see next?